Today, we will speak about cognitive processes and how they influence our perception of social reality, our views on social processes, and our conflict behavior. Categories that we use in our understanding of the world are results of our biological makeup. Our brain processes a lot of information about the world. To make sense of all this data, it categorizes upcoming information. For example, each incoming image must be reduced in complexity in 100 times. Categorization of this sort exists throughout the brain, up to the highest level of categories that we can be aware of. When we see trees, we see them as trees, not just an individual object, distinct from one another. A small percentage of our categories have been formed by conscious acts, but most are formed automatically, unconsciously, as a result of functioning in the world. Take, for example, color. The sky is blue, fresh grass is green, but in reality, our experience of color is created by a combination of several factors: wavelengths of reflected light, color cones of our eyes, and complex activity in brain. Interaction of them produces the color green as our image. The light wave is the content of this image, while green color is the form. Similar to physical images, our perception of social world is also based on categories. The content of these categories is a complex interaction between different people in a variety of social levels. We make sense of this interaction by creating group categories of race, ethnicity, gender, nation, and so on. The category green, for instance, contains essential green as well as other different variations of green. The center-periphery structure of categories helps us to unite all these variations within one category. For example, there are different colors and types of cars, but we perceive all of them as belonging to the category cars. The categories we form are part of our experience. They differentiate aspects of our experience into distinct kinds. Categorization is not a purely intellectual matter. Rather, the development and use of categories is the stuff of experience. Concepts are neutral structures that allow us mentally characterize our categories and reasons about them. For example, we all have a concept of table that unites different types of tables with various functions. When you think about table, some of you think about desk with computer, some about family dinner table, some about cozy small table with snacks. Thus, our categories have a form of prototype. Typical case prototypes provide general information about category members. Ideal case prototypes allow us to evaluate category members relative to some conceptual standards. Think, for example, about typical leader and ideal leader. How social categories are developed. Vygotsky found that every function in the child cultural development appears twice. First, social categories are used in social level, functioning between people, in the processes of everyday interaction and education. Later, they become internalized and function on the individual level, inside the child. Thus, we first have to learn from others about category of ethnicity, and then we will use it in our perception and interaction with others. Are all categories formed in the same way? There are two processes of formation. Scientific concepts are based on abstract conceptual knowledge of culture. For example, we first learn about electricity as a concept through its definition and then receive more information about specific processes and mechanism of its functioning. Spontaneous concepts arrive from concrete activities of everyday life. For example, you have understanding of the concept of lamp, while you probably will not immediately come with its definition. Despite differences in the formation processes, Both types of concepts are pretty rigid and deeply influence our perceptions and behaviors. How these categories function? How they impact our perception? Let's discuss several basic principles. The principle of meta-contrast states that differences within categories are smaller than differences between categories. For example, apples can have different color, size, and shapes. Oranges also can be different in color and size. So sometimes orange and apple could be very similar and look the same. But if I ask you to put them into groups, you will put all apples in one group and all oranges in another group. Thus, you will use categories of apples and oranges and will see the differences between them as more important than differences within each group. Similarly, you will see that all members of one ethnic group are similar to each other and different from representative of another ethnic group. Social categories also should be accessible. You have to know about particular category to be able to use it. For example, you need to know about libertarians in order to apply this category in particular social context. And of course, social category should fit a particular situation. It should represent our normative beliefs and theories about social meaning. What are outcomes of these processes? One of them is outgroup homogeneity. Members of outgroup are perceived as more similar to each other than members of in-group. It results from the differences in information we have about in-group and outgroup, as well as from the meta-contrast. Usually, minorities have higher in-group homogeneity and are perceived by a majority as more similar to each other. This homogeneity is higher on central issues that occur to a particular group. Another outcome of categorization processes are stereotypes. They are usually generalizations of behavior or features of other people. They are assumptions, and often wrong, that people make about the characteristics of all members of a group based on image of the group. For example, we can create ethnic stereotypes, gender stereotypes, and so on. How do these stereotypes influence our behavior? They help us justify our behavior, policies, and structures. For example, if you believe that a particular group is incapable of some activities, your aid policies will be mostly humanitarian rather than educational. If behavior of people is in opposition to your stereotypes about them, you will rather preserve your stereotypes and see this behavior as exceptional or irregular. Stereotypes usually function as self-fulfilling prophecies. If you think that members of other group are less educated, you will treat them in this way, and it will influence their behavior and thus reinforce your stereotype. And finally, scapegoating is used to justify negative or wrong behavior of others by blaming an individual or group. In this lecture, we discussed how our cognitive processes influence our social perceptions and behavior. You will further learn about cognitive biases from the handouts, and they'll explain how they impact our conflict behavior during discussion of this week.